Diary of an Architect Abroad. Aarhus is the second largest city in Denmark, located on the east of the Jutland Peninsula in the geographical center of the country. The town is first mentioned in the 8th century as a fortified Viking settlement at the mouth of the Aarhus River. The urban area of Aarhus has a population of 273,000 inhabitants. During the Industrial Revolution, the population of Aarhus tripled due to job opportunities in the shipbuilding, oil mill, and ironwork industries. Nowadays, the increasing demographics of Aarhus are due to the growing number of incoming international students and young professionals. Aarhus has a total of 52,000 students, which is over 23% of the city's population, which is a similar figure to Glasgow. Viking Age, 8th, 9th, and 10th century. Aarhus emerged in the 8th century as a small Viking settlement at the mouth of the Aarhus River. The town's positioning in the river valley created excellent conditions for agriculture, trade, and defense. The oldest historical account of Aarhus is a physical model locating on the Viking Museum, which portrays the town in the 950s. At the time, an earth rampart had been built to fortify the town. The central space of Aarhus was a pagan burial site, surrounded by small traditional Viking houses with workshops and outdoor spaces for farm animals. The Aarhus Cathedral and the Bispertorf Square stand atop the former pagan burial site. Ever since the Viking Age, this remains the central location of the city and part of its most historic district, the Latin Quarter. Middle Ages, 13th, 14th, and 15th century. The rising power of the Catholic Church was a major catalyst for the urban development of Aarhus throughout the Middle Ages. Many public and religious buildings were built, and Aarhus flourished as a prosperous religious and commercial center. The defensive walls were removed, and the harbor went through major developments. Viking merchant ships sailed through the Aarhus River, which is nowadays part of Indre. Renaissance, 16th, 17th, and 18th century. During the Renaissance period, Aarhus went through a period of recession caused by the war and later on, the plague. The city was ravaged by fires and parts of Indre were destroyed. Wooden walls were erected on the main commercial roads and around religious buildings to prevent goods from being taken away illegally. Molestin, a picturesque cobbled lane in the historic city center, dates back to the Renaissance period. However, it was far from being as idyllic as it is considered to be nowadays.
It was full of delinquents, prostitutes, criminals, etc. During that renovation plan that was proposed by the administration of the city, part of the street was demolished because actually the street goes all the way there, but we now see that there are completely new buildings there. This part of the street was actually conserved because of some artists that started to live in these houses, to paint them and to make them beautiful. So they really persuaded the authorities to conserve the street. Now it is the UNESCO heritage.
Industrialization, 19th century. The Industrial Revolution reaches Aarhus in the 19th century. As maritime trade increases, the river becomes insufficient to accommodate large ships arriving and departing Aarhus. The harbor was moved from the river to the coast, and Aarhus becomes the second largest port in Denmark. The port of Aarhus becomes its own city quarter, and has remained active up to this day. The first railway lines were also built, which led to the emergence of new residential districts such as Frederiksberg. Important landmarks such as the Aarhus Theatre and the Botanic Gardens were built on the second half of the 19th century. Prior to the Second World War, the city went through a period of expansion to respond to the housing demands of the increasing industrial labor. Frederiksberg became a fully developed city quarter, and the residential district of Marselisborg was formed. There is a clear distinction between the historic city center, industrial harbor, and residential districts. After the war, the city entered a phase of rapid growth. The student population tripled, and a freer and more artistic atmosphere arrived Aarhus. As a result, cultural landmarks such as the Dock 1 Public Library and the Aarhus Museum were built in the historic city center. Aarhus U, a major 21st century urban design and architecture project located at the former container port of Aarhus, began construction in the early 2000s. This city quarter contained high-rise mixed-use residential buildings in international architectural style. The concept of hygge is a defining feature of the cultural identity of Aarhus, and it can be described as a feeling of coziness which is deeply rooted in the lifestyle of the Danes. In architecture and urban design, hygge is associated with gathering, spaces that bring the community together. A distinct factor of the urban fabric of Aarhus is the importance given to the space in between buildings, which is well maintained and used by the locals and visitors for gathering. The cycling culture of Denmark is an imprint of democracy, equality, and solidarity. It is one of the few things shared by the Danes from a young to an old age. In Aarhus, children ride back to school, young adults to university and work, and elders for groceries or to stay fit. As such, the cycling infrastructure of Aarhus is highly developed and most streets have cycling lanes. The arrival of Christianism to Denmark and influence of the church in Aarhus led to the construction of new religious buildings. The Aarhus Cathedral is, up to this day, the central element of town and is surrounded by important cultural buildings and public squares. From the first Viking settlement at the mouth of the Aarhus River, the port of Aarhus has been one of the main sources of income for the population. Changes in trade law during the Renaissance period facilitated maritime trade, which led to the development of the harbour, increased demographics, and as a consequence, the development of residential city quarters. A mural of the atomic power, no thanks, smiling sun was painted in a building adjacent to the Von Fruekirke Cathedral, which reflects Denmark's stance against the use of nuclear power. Next to this, a street bench painted with the colors of the LGBT+ flag shows the inclusiveness of Denmark, which was the first country to grant legal recognition to same-sex unions. The urban area of Aarhus is divided into 13 districts or city quarters. The use of each of these 13 districts can be divided into the following categories: Historic City Center, Intrebeu and Latin Quarter. The architecture is low to medium height red brick buildings with decorated shop fronts at ground level and offices and residences on the upper levels. Urban features are cobblestone pavement, pedestrian narrow streets, especially in the Latin Quarter, and gathering spaces. Contemporary buildings such as the Aarhus Museum are well integrated into the urban landscape. Uses are commercial, office, housing, cultural, and city administration. The restaurants and urban spaces at the river's edge are occupied by young adults, most likely students. The Bispertorf Square and Westerallee Park are occupied by families, elders, and students. Traditional residential: Marselisborg, Nieuw-Steenbro, Langnes, Frederiksborg, and Trouwborg. The architecture is 5-story, red brick buildings with parking lot spaces for residents. The residential buildings are larger in scale, less traditional, and taller. Urban features are wide vehicular streets, pedestrian and cycle lanes, and small pocket parks where the main roads intersect. The uses are mostly residential, apart from a few convenience shops and cafes. The users are mostly families and young professionals that work in the city center. Contemporary residential, Aarhus Ö. The architecture is high-rise, mixed-use residential buildings in contemporary international architectural style. Buildings are larger in scale than anywhere else in Aarhus. On ground level, there are a few amenities for the locals: cafe and a platform for winter bathing. Urban features are temporary stalled spaces adjacent to the construction sites. The public spaces adjacent to the residential blocks have been designed for mostly walking and cycling purposes. The uses are mostly residential with commercial and sports facilities. Users are upper middle class professionals in the residential buildings, visitors to the open-air swimming pool, and kite surfers in the water sports complex. Residential and culture: Westerbro. Education: University Quarter. Industrial Harbour, Port of Aarhus. Park and Nature, Marselisborg Park and Rieskov. Industrial Railway, Rail Yard. Arriving Aarhus. Whether one arrives by airport shuttle or train, the central train station is the point of arrival to Aarhus. The cosmopolitan people departure the station in a fast pace with a coffee on their hands, towards an intersection that leads to a busy commercial street. The alternating grey and white pavement slabs remind me of a zebra crossing and instinctively encourage me to keep walking forward through a shopping street. The copper tower of the Aarhus Cathedral is an exception to the uniform skyline of Aarhus and becomes my point of reference for wayfinding. Although the Bispertorf Square is near the river and shopping streets, there is an intimate and welcome feeling to it. I arrived to the heart of the city, the Latin Quarter. There is a medieval European atmosphere and feel to this area, with its chic shops, cafes, small galleries and craft studios. Living in Aarhus. During my time in Aarhus, I lived in local center Marseilles, a small cluster of urban blocks for the elderly with a private community center. The empty flats are offered to new students, which prevents gentrification and encourages the interaction between foreign students and locals. The area is mostly residential and feels safe and quiet. The distance to the university and architectural school, about 30 minutes walking or 15 minutes cycling, makes the area attractive for students who are willing to take part on the Danish cycling culture. On the weekends I was able to relax by cycling to the nearby harbor and watch the fishermen or the display of wind kites at the beach. I would also visit the deer park to see the traditional Danish vernacular architecture. Departing Aarhus, my favorite place. Before leaving Aarhus to return to Glasgow, I took a walk through my favorite places in the city. The waterfront of Aarhus is a gathering space with a quiet and relaxed atmosphere. From where I'm standing, I have a view towards the Dock 1 Public Library. At first sight, the building reminds me of a spaceship, watching over the intersection between the historic city center and harbor. Nonetheless, the wide irregular staircase which leads to the library's main entrance and the gathering spaces it creates in the waterfront make the building inviting and well integrated into its surrounding. I arrived to Aarhus U, the contemporary residential districts I would sometimes visit for inspiration. In comparison to Ingebu, buildings are farther apart from each other, and the spaces in between are aired and vast, and enhances one's perception of being so close to the sea. The breeze and sound of the waves crashing on the rocks create an atmosphere which makes the iceberg building resemble an actual iceberg, and the spaces in between are aired and vast, and enhances one's perception of being so close to the sea. The breeze and sound of the waves crashing on the rocks create an atmosphere which makes the iceberg building resemble an actual iceberg. Conclusion. In conclusion, Aarhus is a city that has developed through different historical periods, and the traces from the past are very much present in the urban fabric of each city quarter up to this day. The geographical location of Aarhus has created excellent opportunities for maritime trade, which has since the Viking Age been a catalyst for its urban development. Other social, economical and political factors are listed in the diagram. Aarhus is historical, innovative, industrial, functional, responsive and adaptable.